year retired naval officer and a naval aviator. He and his wife Shirley now live in Bella Vista, having moved here in 1996. He is a graduate. He is a graduate of. He's a graduate of Abilene Christian University in Abilene, Texas. During his naval service, he served as a carrier-based naval aviator and was a squadron commander. He was instrumental in the development of the Naval Fighter Weapons School, more commonly known today as Top Gun. Following his naval service, he and his wife lived in Saudi Arabia, where he served as the director of flight operations while employed by the Saudi Arabian Oil Company. He holds aircraft transport ratings in 6 different type aircraft, has a BA degree in business administration. It is my pleasure to introduce Colonel Max Gore.
How we doing, Alan? Can everybody hear me? Yes. Good, good. To the United Methodist Women, thank you for this invitation to talk to you about the Civil Air Patrol. I never let the opportunity go by that I don't blow a little smoke in our behalf. If I stand before you in a uniform that looks suspiciously like a United States Air Force uniform, your suspicions are confirmed. In 1948, the Civil Air Patrol received its commission from Congress, and at that point we became an auxiliary of the United States Air Force. I'll bring that up as to how we came to that connection. Presently we do provide services to the government. Later on, after we received that commission from Congress, we were allowed to start wearing the United States Air Force uniform. We have certain Civil Air Patrol insignias that we're allowed to wear. There are a lot of volunteer organizations out there, all of them pursuing some very worthy causes. The Civil Air Patrol is, in fact, a volunteer organization. We don't get paid. We don't get covered by any type of medical. But some of the capabilities that we provide to our government, to the states, all the way down to Benton County, some of those capabilities may surprise you, and I intend to cover some of those. To Mrs. McCain, thank you for that kind introduction. As I recall, you read it exactly the way I wrote it. Had I known that you were going to read it that way, I would have embellished the story just a tad. I understand that we're going to entertain questions afterwards. I do have brand new batteries in my hearing aids, but Mrs. McCain has offered to help me undertake questions. Is that correct, how we're going to handle this? Very good. Before I get to the history of the Civil Air Patrol, I have been asked to give a little of my background as to how I got here this evening. So let's go all the way back to February the 28th, 1936. That's about as far back as I can go. I'm just a few months short of being 80 years old, so I'm looking forward to that. My father was a farmer. My mother was a homebody. My mother and father were good people. That was in southwestern part of Oklahoma. Dryland cotton farmer. You had to love it to get out there and turn that kind of dirt over. Attended a country school, rode a school bus to school every day. The first grade through the 8th grade, I had a total of 8 students in that class. Since then, 4 of those are deceased, leaving 4 of us left. And to this day, we all email each other or text each other just to see how in the world we're doing. In 1950, the county decided to consolidate all of the country schools, and we all then started going to the big city of Frederick, Oklahoma. Population 5,000. That time there was 40 in my class. I graduated in 1954. You all probably don't realize that in 1954, Frederick, Oklahoma was the center of the universe. As a high school graduate, as far as I know, I had never been out of the county, out of Tillman County. So at that point, it was the center of the universe. Thanks to my mother, she decided that I should go to college. I can recall a conversation, actually it was more like an argument between my father and my mother. My father said he's lived on the farm all of his life, he can be a good farmer. My mother said he is going to college. Actually, she said, Alfred, he is going to college. And so that my father could get the last word in on that argument, as I recall, he said, okay. So farm boy went off to Abilene Christian College. At that point, it was called a college. Later on, it became a university, Abilene, Texas. I had fun. I majored in campusology. And to this day, my grades show it. I have contemplated in burning those transcripts. After I pass on, I'm afraid that my children are going to get those transcripts, and they're going to say, well, you know, maybe he wasn't as smart as we thought he was. So I may burn those. I had a brother-in-law, I still have a brother-in-law, that was a naval aviator, World War II. When I got out of college, the day I graduated, matter of fact, I drove to Abilene, or to Dallas, Texas, and joined the Navy. I wanted to be a naval aviator. I can recall my brother-in-law driving through the big city of Frederick, Oklahoma. As I recall, it was a baby blue Mercury convertible. Leather jacket and a yellow scarf. He cut a wide swath going through Frederick, Oklahoma. Anyway, I joined the Navy. 6 weeks later, I was married by that time. 6 weeks later, I was in Pensacola, Florida. 18 months later, I was commissioned an ensign in the United States Navy, and received my Navy Wings of Gold, which I am very proud of. Spent 26 years in the Navy. I flew off most of the aircraft carriers. The Navy treated me good. I got to see an awful lot of the world. I was very fortunate that I got to stay operational, which meant that I got to stay in the aviation business an awful lot. There were times that I ended up pushing a desk, paperwork, but I always wanted to get back into the cockpit. And a couple of things happened that allowed me to do that, so therefore I stayed operational. Not all of those 26 years, but for most of them. Two events happened while I was in the Navy that my family to this day remembers. It's amazing the things that I accomplished in the Navy, and my family comes up and remembers two things. As Mrs. McCain mentioned, that was the start of the Vietnam War. The Navy was transitioning from the F-8 Crusader, which we affectionately referred to as the last of the gunfighters. It had guns. And we were transitioning into the F-4 Phantom. The philosophy at that time that we were going to shoot a missile at 19 miles, shoot the enemy down, and return back and land. But Vietnam taught us a different story real quick. That we were still in the era of dogfighting, and that this dogfight could start at 30,000 feet, but you were going to end up down treetop by the time it was all said and done. When the folks that were coming out of the F-8 Crusader came into the Phantom, they accepted that philosophy that we were going to be at 40,000 feet, shoot a missile, call it a day. So consequently, we lost some of the dogfighting enthusiasm, the capability, some of our skills. Early on in the Vietnam War, our kill ratio was probably 2 to 1. And we saw that that was really unacceptable. So we started training, going back into the dogfighting envelope. The Phantom had tremendous capability, but also part of that capability was not good. We always like to say that don't get into a slow dogfight, because whatever you're going up against, they're going to have you for lunch. So we always talked about being at 400, 450 knots, and we call that the speed of life. As a result of that, the East Coast started this philosophy of getting back into the dogfighting. The West Coast, part of the Navy, started that. Eventually, they combined both of those two entities, and it became known as the Naval Fighter Weapons School, and it was in Pensacola, or Miramar, Naval Air Station Miramar in San Diego. Eventually, they adopted the name of Top Gun. That was a long time before Tom Cruise even came onto the scene. The second event that my family, and invariably at Thanksgiving table, one of my family members will say, "Dad, tell me about the time you had the encounter with the unidentified flying object." And I know that that's every Thanksgiving we go through that whole process. I have to tell them about Top Gun. and I have to tell them about the unidentified flying object that I got involved with. I'm sure that over the years, heavens help me if I embellished those stories, but invariably at the Thanksgiving table, it'll always come up. After 26 years, I did retire from the United States Navy. I was looking for a job. I knew that I had a former squadron commander that he and I got along together quite well. He was the manager of the aviation department in Saudi Arabia. I got in touch with him and I told him that I am available. I need a job. I met him in Houston, and 6 weeks later my wife and I ended up in Dhahran, Saudi Arabia, working for the Arabian American Oil Company. We shortened that down to Aramco. Aramco is the largest oil producing company in the world. I made a comment to my family that they produced about 12 million barrels of oil a day, to which one of my daughters said, "Dad, where do they get all of those barrels from?" I said, "Well, darling, we pipe it to a terminal and then it's put into a tanker that's holding 2 to 3 million barrels of oil, and then it's distributed throughout the countryside." To this day, it's kind of an inside joke between that particular daughter and I about how many barrels. So I tease her about it quite a bit. We lived in Saudi Arabia for 15 years, and as was mentioned, I sat in as the chief pilot and the director of flight ops quite often, although I tried to convince my manager that I have pushed enough papers. I'd rather be sitting in the cockpit flying. So that part of the world that I did not get to see in the Navy, I got to see the rest of it when I was employed by Aramco, and got to see the rest of the world. We lived in a compound with 20,000 folks. About 99% U.S., Canadian, Australian, New Zealand. It was actually sort of like suburban USA. Gas stations, Safeway store, golf courses, swimming pools. Of course, we lost all of that as soon as we went out the front gate and went into the local Saudi towns. I've sort of lost my train there. Early on in my career in Saudi Arabia, I was flying a particular airplane that we would take logistics and personnel to the desert, to the drilling rigs. At one time, there was 48 drilling rigs operating in the desert of Saudi Arabia. We constantly had airplanes going 24/7, 7 days out of the week. On one of my trips out, we were at the rig having lunch, and an elderly Saudi came along and sat across the table from me. And he says, "You're American, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes, sir, I certainly am." "Are you a Christian?" Living in Saudi Arabia, we had to be careful. We carried our Bibles around in a paper sack. Now, the Saudis knew that there was a Bible in that paper sack, but the fact that we had it covered, that was all right for them. He says, "You're a Christian." I thought for a second, and I said, "Yes, sir, I am." He says, "I want to show you something." We went to the back of the rig into a chart room, and he's shuffling through some charts, and he shows me a chart, and at the top of that chart was written Midian. He said, "Have you seen that word before?" I said, "Yes, I have." I said, "I think it's mentioned in Genesis, and I think after Moses killed the Egyptian, that he went to the land of Midian, as I recall. He knew about Moses' father-in-law, Jethro. He knew about Moses' wife, that was Jethro's daughter. Do you recall her name?
Sarah.
Jehoshaphat?
Sarah.
Yeah, I think so. He asked me, "How would you like to see where Moses lived?" He knew that Moses lived in Midian for 40 years. That was intriguing to me. Over the next 2 months, phone calls back and forth. I said, we finally met. I flew into this dirt strip, 10,000 feet long. He met me at the airplane. We jumped in a Toyota pickup and struck out northwest. No roads, no direction, no GPS. We just struck off. After about about an hour and a half, it seemed that long for initially. Again, this is another one of those stories that my family says, "Well, Dad, tell us about when you went to saw where Moses lived." After about an hour and a half, I started seeing an encroachment. Looked like it might have been 1,500 feet tall. As we got up to it, I could see that it was limestone, and that as you looked up high enough, you could in fact see what could in fact have been some sort of rooms. There was a chain link fence around that site, probably 5 acres, 4 to 5 acres. Above that chain link fence was concertina wire, and that fence and that perimeter was being patrolled by the Saudi police force. I asked him, I said, "How do we know that's where Moses lived?" And he says, "Because 15 miles to the north here is where Jethro and his family lived." As I recall the Bible story, didn't they get so many cattle that they had to separate them? I forget sort of that story. But he says, that's where Moses lived. He says, that's been handed down through tradition. And I always think about that. For the next several years, I would meet that gentleman in the little Saudi town, just inadvertently run into him. And invariably, we hugged each other. I got a kiss on each cheek. We talked for a minute. He invited my wife into his home. Once we walked through the front, sorry, Alan. Once we walked through the front door, my wife went to the right, and that's where she had her meal, and I went to the left with the boys, where I had my meal. The most hospitable person that you could ever want to know or meet. I heard recently that he is now deceased, and I was sorry to hear that. But in 1996, I thought it was time to come home. We retired to here in Northwest Arkansas. We drove through this part of the country on 2 or 3 of our vacations. We got to come back from Saudi Arabia twice a year. We drove through this area. My wife and I thought, this is really a nice part of our country. We had family in Des Moines, Iowa, family in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. We thought that's halfway in between everybody. But I saw the golf courses and the lakes, and I decided this is where we needed to move to. Lived on Loch Lomond for several years. And a few years ago, we moved to the number 17th tee box of the country club, just down the hill here. So it's a long walk up, but an easy walk going down. After a while, I got sort of burnt out on the fishing. Alan, I'll get in one spot, sir, and quit moving.
You're doing fine, sir.
Oh, all right, good then. Got tired of fishing, got tired of playing golf. I said, there's got to be something else that I can do. And I read some stories on the Civil Air Patrol, articles that came up in the paper, and I thought, that's something that I can do. Ms. McLean, how are we doing on time? Am I? Oh. In the late 1930s, a couple of aviation journalists came back from Europe. They painted a bad story that there was a war coming on the horizon, and that our government needed to do something about it. Apparently there was quite a discussion going on. We had a group of aviation enthusiasts at that time who argued that we need an organization where we can use civilian airplanes, our talents, and our skills to aid in the protection, defense of our great nation. One December 1941, Civil Air Patrol was born. Those small airplanes were going to be used in the defense of the country at that time. Obviously, 1 week later was Pearl Harbor. Shortly thereafter, we became involved in the war in Europe. At that point, the German U-boats came ashore the eastern shore, and as our shipping was running up and down the coast, they would surface and launch a torpedo and sink. Thousands and thousands of tons of ships and lives were lost within that first year due to German U-boats. The Civil Air Patrol became spotters. They would fly up and down the East Coast. They would see a submarine, and the antiquated radios that they had, they would notify the Navy. The Navy would launch a sort of a surface ship, which obviously is going to take some time to get there. In '43, they decided that why don't we put a bomb on this little airplane. 57 submarines were attacked. Several hundred submarines were sighted, but as I say, 57 were attacked. 2 were sunk. And during the 42-43 time frame, 64 Civil Air Patrol members lost their lives. After the war, a German U-boat commander published his memoirs, and in discussing the book, someone asked him, why did you all back off from the East Coast since you had easy targets with the shipping coming back and forth? His reply was, because of those little yellow airplanes. They knew that they had been spotted, and he says, we backed off. We didn't need that. 1946, President Truman incorporated the Civil Air Patrol as a volunteer nonprofit organization. 1948, Congress established, as I had mentioned, the Civil Air Patrol as an auxiliary of the United States Air Force. Our chain of command starts at our level. Actually, at the top of that level is 1st Air Force, a 4-star general. You dribble down his chain of command, and way down at the bottom will be the Civil Air Patrol. Our headquarters are in Maxwell Air Force Base in Alabama, and that is commanded by a 2-star volunteer member. Each of our 50 states has a wing associated with it. Here in Little Rock, here in Arkansas, our headquarters are in Little Rock. Our wing commander is a colonel. He is a retired Army, U.S. Army colonel. Again, a volunteer. Here in Arkansas, we have squadrons, obviously, here in Northwest Arkansas. Fort Smith, Little Rock, Hot Springs, Mountain Home, Memphis, Searcy, Jonesboro. And each one of those will have senior members like me and cadets ages 12 through age 20, but we usually start losing those cadets at around 18. They get out of high school, they go off to college. The boys start liking the girls, and the girls start liking the boys, and the Civil Air Patrol kind of dwindles by the side at that point. Our Rogers... May we proceed, Ellen? The Rogers Squadron is at obviously, at Rogers, at the airport in Rogers. We meet on Tuesday night. As I mentioned, we've got about 40 senior members and about 60 cadets, again, ages 18 through about 18. 12 through 18. When Congress established the Civil Air Patrol as a nonprofit organization, they gave us 3 missions. We're to teach aerospace to our cadets and in the local community, in the local schools. We have a cadet program, which I will cover here very shortly, and then we do emergency services. When I explain to people what the Civil Air Patrol does in the emergency services part of our mission, they're a little surprised. So I'd like to share with you some of those. I was sorry, Alan, I just can't stand still very long. Early on in the Civil Air Patrol, we were used to locate aircraft that were overdue, or if there's unfortunate accident, a crash, to locate that crash site. I'm going to move back to the podium, Alan. Thank you, sir. Thank you, thank you. Each airplane has an ELT, an emergency locator transmitter. In the event of a crash, that transmitter will start sending out a signal. That signal is picked up by a satellite, and that satellite sends that ELT signal to the Air Force Rescue Control Center at Tyndall Air Force Base in Florida. If it's in the northwest part of it, the signal is in the northwest part of Arkansas, they pick up the phone and they will call Conway, the Department of Emergency Management. Conway calls the Civil Air Patrol, says we have an ELT in northwest part of Arkansas. At that time, the technology would usually get it down to a 20 to a 30 square mile. We have a Cessna 182 that has direction finding equipment on board. We would get a crew together, we would launch, and with this equipment we could find the airplane. We could get a ground team in there, but at that point our job is finished. It's now to the law enforcement. We find the crash site, we tell them where it is, law enforcement will come in and take care of it at that point. As the years progressed, we started doing several things. As I mentioned earlier, for the government, particularly the military, for the states, even all the way down into the county, Benton County. With all of the flooding that's been going on in Texas and Oklahoma, I personally have flown several damage assessment flights into the state of Oklahoma to assist the Oklahoma wing. In the airplane, we will have a photographer in the back seat. They're taking pictures out of a photo window. Those pictures will go to a laptop that's sitting next to the photographer. That laptop sends it up to a satellite, the picture. And it is sent to our principal customer at that time. We'll have an email address. So they're looking at real-time pictures as they come across. Sometimes the load, I'm not a computer type, but I understand you can finally overload a computer to where it won't send it. We would come back and we would download those pictures right straight to our principal customer. Again, they've got a picture right there that they can look at to damage assessment. We've been down on the Red River looking for damage control, damage assessment there, taking pictures and providing them to our principal customer. The tornado that happened, was that in Mayflower, just to the west of Little Rock? Within 1 hour of the tornado, the Civil Air Patrol was called that we needed an airplane overhead. An hour and 15 minutes later, there was an airplane overhead taking pictures. Those pictures went right straight to Conway, to the Department of Emergency Management. One of the services that as volunteers, we provide. For Benton County, trash dumps. We will take a county employee up. The last time I did that, I was surprised as to how he knew the county. Oh, that's where so-and-so lives. That's where so-and-so lives. You know, I'm thinking, how does he know all of that? We would find trash along the roads. We would provide him a latitude and a longitude of that particular site. The next day, he's in a pickup. He drives out to that dump site, trash site. He goes through the trash, finds an address, finds a phone number, and then he goes, visits those people. He writes out a ticket, they get a fine, and they're told within 72 hours it's got to be gone. Again, one of the services that we provide. We, if I might add, all volunteers. One of the things that the state wanted us to do was provide surveillance of residents, homes, activities, vehicles. Most of us who were former military, we said that is stretching the thought process here a little bit. we're getting awful close to becoming law enforcement. And most of the members, I guess all of the members said, we don't do surveillance, you know. We work a lot with the Arkansas Fish and Game Commission. We survey lakes throughout the state. When a lake becomes overfished, what's the word that I'm looking for there? Does the lake become pressured, overpressured? I can't remember the exact words that I'm looking for there, but no boats means there's no fish. Maybe we need to restock that particular lake. A lot of boats, it may become at that point be a pressured type lake. As I say, we do an awful lot of work for the Arkansas Fish and Game Commission. Katrina. Within 24 hours, the Arkansas wing was notified that we would be going to state of Louisiana to do damage assessment. There was no place for us to really land at that point. 3 days later, the airport at Baton Rouge cleared the runways. We were able to proceed down to Baton Rouge at that time. Devastation. I'd never seen such, I don't think. For the first few days, we operated off of 2 generators for our websites, internet access, and those 2 generators were provided by Civil Air Patrol. In the middle of the first week, we eventually got electricity in there, which helped us quite a bit. Our first mission was to take pictures of all of the hospitals in the New Orleans surrounding area. They gave us a list. They eventually said, get the phone directories and find out where all of the smaller hospitals are. There was a couple hundred, as I recall the number. We went to Google, typed in the address of that particular medical facility. That gave us the longitude and latitude, and that became a target for us. Our first flight out of Baton Rouge, we had 32 medical facilities that we were to look at. That flight lasted about 4 hours, as I recall. A lot of those were deep in water. We took pictures of that. We tried to use our some of our other missions were post offices. The second week, we went back and took pictures of all of those facilities again to see whether the water had receded. The third week, we went back and took pictures to see whether it had all had receded. Well, we won't talk about that point. We'll just press on here. We do a lot of work with the Air Force in their low-level routes. We have data equipment on the airplane that will show us where all of the towers are, and we will fly those low-level routes looking for additional towers. If we find one that's not in our database, we write the longitude and latitude down, we pass it on to the Air Force, and they make sure that it's there. Another thing, we're involved with the Drug Enforcement Administration, the counter drug. We are not law enforcement people. We provide hybrid assistance. There will be 4 to 5 helicopters that will have state, FBI, local police, sheriffs. They're all on board. They're all armed. they will start running all of the creeks looking for marijuana farms. They will land. Someone in that helicopter group is from the county, Carroll County, Benton County. Is it Madison that's to the south of us? They call the local district attorney, says that we need a search warrant. It's passed on back to them via a text message, and they go into the marijuana farm, and whoever's located, they arrest them at that point. We're not law enforcement. We provide high bird assistance. When they take off, we'll climb up to 10,000 feet or so, talk to the people, listen to them. We'll take a report on the hour, at the bottom of the hour, make sure that they're still operating. Falcon Virgo, should I? Okay. We provide an exercise. We attend to an exercise out in El Paso at the White Sands Missile Range, where the Army's Air Defense Command gets certified to eventually go into Washington, D.C. and relieve the Air Defense Command, that battalion that is there. We provide a service for them. That's about a 10-day operation. Wow. May I mention the bat flights?
Please mention the bat flights. I've been waiting for the bat flights.
The government has made the gray bat as an endangered species, and they knew that we needed to do some surveys. The caves are being encroached upon by land developers, people, commercial. They were worried about the insecticides that were being used that were maybe decimating the bats. So they said we needed a survey. Arkansas got a grant from the government, and they put out a bid. The Arkansas State University got that bid, and they came to the Civil Air Patrol and says, can you provide airplane assistance? And we've been doing that now for about 10 days. I flew a flight last night. The day before, we were talking about, let me back up here. I'm sorry. Students from the Arkansas State University go to the caves. They have a cage that they have, a framed cage, and when the bats come out, they will catch 200 or 300 bats in this little cage affair, and they will take 25 of the bats out and put a transmitter on them, an adhesive transmitter, and that adhesive lasts for about 10 days, and the transmitter lasts for about 10 days. Each transmitter is numbered from a frequency-wise. The young man that's in the airplane with me, he has a scanner, and it reads out the frequencies. He says, okay, here they come out. They're all coming out. The day before, they were talking about bat 99.4. What a screwed up bat he was. So, it didn't mean anything to me, but the young man that's in the airplane with me, they become part of his family. Here they all come. Oh, there they go. Oh, they just, and we're at about 3,500 feet. There's a cave at Cave Springs, Logan Cave, which is just to the north of Siloam, and the other one's in the area of Crystal Lake. Those caves have thousands and thousands of bats in them. I don't know how they number them, but he talked about so many seconds, so many bats. I took his word for that. But last night, he said, where is 99.4? And all of the bats had come out of the cave, and they had all started foraging throughout the countryside, about 10 miles from the cave. And all at once, he said, there he is. He said, turn to the southwest. Now 99.4 was a single bat. And he says, let's follow him. And obviously we're flying a little faster than he can fly, so we would have to do a 360 degree turn. He'd be off out there a little further. He took it personal. He's just, where's he going? I thought it was kind of humorous. The young man is going to use this as his thesis for his master's. Anyway, 99.4, the power plant that's just to the south of Ceylon, I forget the name of that little lake that's there, the bat stopped. And we thought, okay, he's foraging there. He's eating mosquitoes and flies and moths, whatever a bat would eat. An hour later, he heads back to the cave, and we follow him back to the cave. Now, mind you, the other 24 bats are still out there. They're still out there eating. But the one bat goes to the lake, eats his fill, and heads back. He found out that some of the lakes, or some of the bats, were going to Crystal Lake, into their cave, because they didn't come back out the night before. It was really interesting how we all came about talking about that. But the bat flights, that's another service that we provide to the... So, as I said, there are a lot of volunteer organizations out there that are promoting worthy causes. We in the Civil Air Patrol, a volunteer organization, those are some of the services that we provide to our government, to the state, and to the county. I have new batteries in my hearing aids, but I think that Mrs. McCain is going to entertain any questions to help me get through the evening.
I think because of time, we're going to limit it to what, 5 questions? I don't think I need it.
I wouldn't touch that. Thank you. Did I plant that question with you earlier? We have a wonderful cadet program. As I said, ages 12, they can stay until they turn 21, but usually around 18 we start losing attention at that point.
What do they do?
Since we're an auxiliary of the United States Air Force, they come in as an airman. And right off the bat, they want BDUs. Give me a BDU, the battle dress uniform. We provide that to them. After a while, we provide a uniform, just like this, to them. They come in as an airman, and they'll work their way up through the sergeant ranks until where they come up to a master chief. Is that it, Holly? Chief master. Okay. What was the?
Do they have classroom activities?
Yes,
and flight?
yes. We teach aerospace to them. We have a chaplain. We moral education there. Once they can come into the cadet officer ranks, they go first lieutenant, and they can go right on up through the cadet to the colonel ranks. At that time, it was Congressman Bozeman, now Senator Bozeman. He's been to us on 2 or 3 occasions, and he has told us, if you send me a cadet, a student, I'll not question it. Colonel Gray will approve it. Each year we'll send at least one to the Air Force Academy. I can't convince them that they need to go to the Naval Academy, but that is all right too. And thank you for bringing that point up. Sorry. For me to tell you the first part of my story, I think back on it. I was a farm boy that did good, and I tell the cadets that we live in a country where opportunities are abundantly available. All you got to do is set your sights, set some goals, and go for it. That it is possible. I also tell them that there's consequences to your decisions and to your actions, both good and both bad. I use O.J. Simpson as he made some terrible decisions in his life. Who was the Steve Jobs, who invented Microsoft? He made some decisions in his life, and he lived in a garage, as I understand it, for 5 or 6 years, and came up with the Microsoft operating system. And I said, so everything that you do in your life is going to have to do with some decisions. If they're bad, you're going to have to live with them. I just try to impress that upon our cadets so much. I often tell people that our cadets are the cream of the crop. There are a lot of youth programs out there. I personally think that there are none better. We teach leadership, skills. So when they, at age 18, when they leave, they've got some savvy about them. So thank you for.
So where's that at? Where's that at?
Where do they meet?
Rogers Airport. We have a sign right from the road. You can say it's Civil Air Patrol. Monday nights we start at 6:30 till about 9. We'd all like to leave at 9, but for some reason I refer to them as kids. Our cadets, they'll stay to 9:30, a quarter to 10. Mothers and fathers are waiting out in the parking lot. Just go home. The parents, bless their hearts, have to be so dedicated to get their cadet there at 6:30 on a Tuesday night when they probably have worked all day long themselves, get their cadet there, turn right around and come back at 9 o'clock and have to sit in the parking lot for 30 minutes waiting on their cadet to come out. It's a wonderful program.
Is there a question back there? Any other questions?
One right there.
Okay. Jim?
How are you funded?
How are you funded?
Some of the missions that we provide, like Katrina, that funding came from the state. Our airplane, we operated about $100 an hour, about $40 for fuel, and about $60 for the maintenance program. So it's about $100 an hour. The Army, the military cannot even come close to matching that capability. To get a huge helicopter out there or a C-130, you're talking about several $100s an hour. We can do it. The airplane is provided to us by the United States Air Force, but it's $100 an hour. The Cadet Program is self-funded. But some of the missions that we do for the Air Force, they pay for the fuel and for the airplane. Good question.
Yes, so this goes back to your carrier operation days. Landing an aircraft on a carrier deck in a calm sea looks challenging enough. How do y'all do that when the deck is pitching and up and down? How do y'all hit it?
That gentleman's name is Jim.
No, Jim's back there.
Okay.
He's next. About landing on an aircraft carrier when it's rocking.
You gotta be fearless. During the weather, night operations during the weather, I often say you sort of start separating the boys from the men at that point. And there were people who said, I'd prefer not to fly at night. Well, the next time around, they were removed from the squadron. We just didn't accept anybody that didn't want to fly at night. But on the other hand, we appreciated them coming and said, I can't do it at night. You know. So self-evaluation, we appreciated that. But it's a challenge. It's a challenge.
Yeah.
I was just going to ask, with all your background in finding crash sites,
What was what?
how is it possible that you could lose an airliner like the Malaysian airline? Nobody can find any trace of it.
How could you possibly lose an aircraft like the Malaysian ones? I mean, those commercials that just disappeared.
I know that I didn't give you that question. Sir, I don't know. That's a mystery. That is a mystery that here in the 21st century that we could lose an airplane with 200 or 300 people on board and not know where they are. I don't know. I can't even hazard. Don't know whether the crew was involved or whether they had something happen in the airplane, hypoxia. They said that particular airplane got up to about 45,000. You lose half of the Earth's atmosphere at 18,000. So you may think you're breathing real good at 18,000, but you're only bringing in 50% of the oxygen. So as you get up higher, all at once you pass out. I don't know. It will be interesting when they find the airplane and get the flight recorder and find out what really took place. Good question.
Okay. What do you guys think of this speaker?
As I said, I never let the opportunity go by that I don't blow a little smoke in behalf of the Civil Air Patrol. We do a tremendous amount, provide a lot of service to our government and the states and to looking for trash dumps.
On behalf of the United Methodist Women, we pay all of our speakers.
Whoa!
There's a little
Boy.
money for the cadets.
Yeah.
Oh, how about
That-
you know?
Why don't we usually, are you good? Oh, I'm sorry.
This will go into our funded file for the Civil Air Patrol to the question back there. So I'll pass that on to our commander, and he can put it in the bank for us.
Dawn, I thought I did this.
Thank you.
We usually form a circle and sing, "Blessed be the tie that binds," but why don't we just stand where we are and sing, and then